Thank you. First of all, I'd like to welcome all of you to today's webinar. I'm David Johnson. For those of you that do not know me, I'm here today representing the Wyoming Business Council. Today's webinar is designed to provide you with an overview of the state's BEAD challenge process and a quick overview of the challenge portal and portal registration process as well. There will be a technical webinar on May 13th to provide you with detailed training on the portal. And we encourage you to register for that if you've not done so already. It'll be important for you to understand how the portal works, and that information will be delivered on that day. Presenting today are Amy Meekum from CTC Technologies and Richmond Hahn from Ready, who is the vendor that operates the portal for us. The webinar will be recorded and posted on the Wyoming Broadband Office BEAD broadband landing page, along with a user guide for the portal. After Amy and Richmond have presented, we will have a Q&A session. And I would ask that as we move through the webinar, if you would like to put your questions, please put them in the Q&A section. And with that, I will turn it over to Amy.
Thank you, David. As David noted, good morning, everyone. My name is Amy Meekum, and I am here supporting the Wyoming Broadband Office as well. I want to thank everyone for joining today. We really appreciate your time. And today's webinar really focuses on an introduction to the Wyoming BEAD challenge process to help potential participants prepare the state for its participation in the BEAD program. So I wanted to start by introducing the agenda, if we could move to that slide. As you know, this is a historic moment for broadband. The Wyoming Broadband Office is committed to providing as much information as possible during the BEAD planning process to ensure full participation and the greatest impact for the broadband coverage across Wyoming. Today, we'll start with an overview of the BEAD program in general, and then an overview of the challenge process, and then move into a discussion of the different types of challenges. First, the challenge phase, the rebuttal phase, and finally, the final determination phase. And then we will go into a bit about the licenses that are involved with participation in the challenge process as an additional level of participation. And then finally, we will go through a bit of the timeline and some of the future activities. We can move to the next slide. So what is the BEAD program? The Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program was created by the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act of 2021, and the BEAD program allocated $42.45 billion in federal funding, and it is administered by the National Telecommunications and Information Administration. I used to work there, and it's still a mouthful to say. So that's NTIA. That's part of the Department of Commerce. And that is the agency that sets the requirements and phases of the program and that the WBO is participating in. And again, the BEAD's program overall goal is to expand high-speed internet and access across the United States. And the Wyoming Broadband Office is focused on ensuring that the BEAD program policies are met within the state. The primary use of BEAD funds will be used to fund infrastructure projects to build out services to unserved and underserved locations throughout the state. If we can keep going. So the definition, according to the BEAD NOFO, or the Notice of Funding Opportunity from the federal agency, NTIA, unserved locations that do not have access to broadband service or only have access to service speeds below 25 megabits per second download and 3 megabits per second upload. And then anything that is underserved, which is between that 25 3 speed and below 100 megabits per second down and 20 megabits per second up is considered unserved for these purposes. If we can go to the next slide. So really the three priorities for BEAD funding allocation are in order. The first priority is those unserved areas. And then the second priority is underserved locations. And then if there's funding left over, which we do not anticipate in most Western states, but especially in Wyoming, then any additional funding would be allocated to connecting community anchor institutions that have less than a gigabit symmetrical service, or eligible community anchor institutions for these purposes. Now, during a little bit about the timeline, we spent 2023 really putting together a number of plans for the BEAD program. That included a BEAD 5-year action plan and 2 volumes of an initial proposal. Volume 1, which includes the BEAD challenge process for the state, and Volume 2, which includes a bit about how applications will be scored, as well as detailed plans for the program within the state. Volume 1 has been approved and is available on the WBO's website. So that is available now, and Volume 2 is under review with the federal government. That was provided to the federal government in December. This year is really the beginning of implementation of each of the programs, including the challenge process. And the challenge process, the importance of the challenge process is really getting that data of unserved and underserved locations as close as possible to correct as the state can. Because that data is critical to what locations are available to be served under the BEAD program, it is very important to think about whether that data is currently accurate in the state and what may or may not need to be challenged through the challenge process. Followed by the challenge process, Wyoming will implement its both a pre-qualification application and a scoring application phase to allow applicants a longer period to pull together and provide the data needed for the application process, much of which is dictated by the federal government. And then in 2025, those plans, those finalized locations will be sent to the federal government for review and approval, and the state will look to begin deployment sometime in 2025. We can go to the next slide. So this is a slightly different look at all of the things that the WBO is doing over the course of this timeline, including continued community engagement. At the same time, there is, as a follow-up to the digital access plan, there's digital equity deployment planning, which is NTIA has a digital equity capacity grant program that the state is following up and shaping currently. And then there's continued BEAD planning, including establishing the challenge process and the BEAD sub-grantee deployment program. We can move to the next slide. So what is the purpose of the BEAD challenge process? Since the BEAD program aims to bring high-speed internet to unserved and underserved locations, we first need to confirm which areas are unserved and underserved. The challenge process provides a mechanism to update the map to establish eligible locations and community anchor institutions that should be BEAD eligible. It gives challengers the chance to offer input on whether certain locations are not accurately reported in Federal Communications Commission data, which is the baseline data set that's used here, and therefore should be eligible for BEAD funding. We can go to the next slide. So then why is it so important to participate? It's important because it allows the state and you, whether you're a local government, tribal nation, nonprofit, or ISP, to update the data that determines the BEAD funding and whether the BEAD funding will be allocated and when it gets approved from NTIA. If the map is currently inaccurate, you can submit evidence for updates. It really is the state's best chance to correct the data that needs to be corrected. The challenge process is necessary to determine BEAD eligibility and achieve the BEAD program purpose. And that program purpose is the goal of providing everyone with reliable internet. But it also prevents the misrepresentation of data for the program and other programs moving forward. It will help us determine which areas need better service so that they can allocate funds efficiently and design impactful projects. So can we go to the next slide? The challenge process follows a particular sequence as designated by NTIA. First, the eligible locations will be published 7 days before the challenge window opens, at least 7 days before the challenge window opens, and we anticipate that you will see them on the WBO website soon. That allows potential challengers to look at the data as it is on the current FCC maps. Once the challenge window opens, eligible challengers will have 30 days to submit challenges, including all required evidence. Once this happens, a location enters the challenge state. And then you can see then there's a 30-day rebuttal phase, a 30-day final determination phase, and then a publication of final eligible locations and a submission to NTIA for approval. If NTIA makes any changes, then those changes will also be updated and indicated for the final eligible locations. We can go to the next slide. So who can submit a challenge? NTIA has been very clear that there is a limited number of entities that can submit challenges. These include broadband service providers or internet service providers, tribal nations, local governments, and nonprofit organizations. Can individuals participate? NTIA does not allow individuals to submit challenges directly. However, individuals can still play a role by providing such information that's relevant to either nonprofits or local governments that are participating in these challenges. Now, let's move on to permissible challenges. The WBO will allow challenges on the following grounds. Aspects that can be included are the identity and identification of eligible anchor institutions as defined in the initial proposal, Volume 1. Community anchor and BEAD eligibility determinations. So really that means identifying CAIs or challenging the eligibility of CAIs in the data sets. The identification of or challenging enforceable commitments for specific locations. Identifying planned service for specific locations. And internet speeds and other specifications to determine BEAD eligibility. Next slide. The challenge types that are allowable include availability, or showing that high-speed internet is not available at a specific location. Speed, showing that speeds are below standards to be considered served, as noted earlier. Latency, showing that latency exceeds a certain amount, typically 100 milliseconds per second. 100 milliseconds, thank you. Data cap, demonstrating that the plan has an unreasonable data restriction. Technology, if there are claims that a certain technology is available at a location where it is not. And business service only. If residential service is not offered and only business service is offered at a particular location. Next slide. Okay. Continuing on our challenge types include enforceable commitment, showing that a location is not marked as served, will be served, and that ISP has an enforceable commitment to do so. planned service, showing the location that is not marked as served is planned to have been served by the end of June 2024. Not part of an enforceable commitment, showing that a location that is marked to be under an enforceable commitment is not in fact bound by such enforceable commitment. The location is a CAI, or Community Anchor Institution, showing that a location is not currently represented as a community anchor institution and fits the definition designated as a CAI. Or a location is not a CAI, showing that a location is listed as a CAI does not fit the definition of that location anymore. One special kind of challenge is the area or multiple dwelling unit, or MDU challenge. For both the area challenge and the MDU challenge, if a specific number of challenges are submitted in an area or MDU, then the ISP has the burden of proof to show that all locations in that area are served. For example, in a census block group, if 6 or more locations served by the same ISP are challenged, then the ISP must submit evidence to prove that the locations in the whole census block are served, even the locations that did not submit the challenge. And let me say that again, because we have seen in some other states that ISPs do not understand this. So just so you know, in a census block group, if 6 or more locations are served by the same ISP, if those are challenged, then the entire census block group is considered challenged. And so for nonprofits, local governments, you need at least 6 locations in order to challenge an entire census block group. On the flip side, the ISP must have evidence that prove the locations in the entire census block group are served, even if those do not have a challenge against them. Likewise, let me go back for a second. Likewise, an MDU challenge, if a large MDU has at least 3 units submit a challenge, then the ISP serving that MDU must also submit evidence to prove that even the units that didn't submit a challenge are served. This applies for availability, speed, latency, data cap, and technology challenges. The ISP's rebuttal to the area or MDU challenge must show at least 80% of the locations meet a specific threshold for the standards to be considered served. Okay, now we can move on. Let's talk a little bit about cost-plus licensing, because I know that there's some confusion around this. The state has sent out a notice about cost-plus licenses that are available for participants in the challenge processes. There are 2 types of licensees, and they're offered in partnership with CostQuest. The Type D license and the Type E license are the most relevant here. The Tier D and Tier E. Tier D is for internet service providers, meaning recipients or prospective recipients of federal broadband program funding. And Tier E is for local governments, tribal governments, and nonprofits. We can go to the next slide. And the key differences are you can participate in the challenge process without such a license, but with such a license, you can see that you can match a location ID, which will be the data published about unserved and underserved locations. So you will get a list of location IDs without having that associated data. It is difficult to understand and prepare location challenges for area challenges or MDU challenges. So with the license, you can actually download the full data set, incorporate them into GIS visualizations and analyze potential challenges, and prepare bulk challenges using downloaded data. Now, without such a license, you can still submit a challenge, you can rebut a challenge, and you can access Fabric data through the portal map only, where you'll be able to see mapping information, as Richmond will go through in a moment. Let's go to the next slide. Again, that license data has proprietary information about fabric IDs, and the location fabric is really, I think of it, I like to simplify it, and I think of it as the addresses that match those IDs. It's really a little bit more detailed than that, but it is, it's the address or the GIS location, so you know what matches the availability IDs. That proprietary information is only authorized to be used by licensed challengers and their authorized users. So again, you can participate in the challenge process, but you will have access to more information if you have requested such licenses. And again, just want to emphasize, if you are assisting a local government, tribal government, or nonprofit, you can also get a license by applying for a Tier 4 license and then a Tier E license. So something to consider in terms of requesting licenses to be able to assist local and tribal governments, as well as nonprofits. I'm not going to run through the whole list. Let's get to Richmond's presentation, but this presentation will be available on the website, and there is details on the in that slide about how to obtain a license and what you need for that. Keep going. Next slide, please. Okay, just a quick run through of the challenge process again. So on the challenge phase, challengers have 30 days to submit their challenge through the WBO portal, and ISPs being challenged are then notified via email from the portal, and then accepted challenges enter what's considered the challenged state, which means then they move on to rebuttal, basically. If we can go to the next slide, quick run through the rebuttal phase. The minimum evidence for challenges will be delineated in the slide, but basically, if we think about there's a list in the initial proposal volume 2 or volume 1 of the minimum evidentiary requirements. So, for example, an address provided for a challenge is a broadband serviceable location. It can be found in the FCC fabric that I just discussed. The challenge service is on the national broadband map and meets the definition of reliable broadband service, which means fiber, cable, hybrid fiber, cable, DSL, terrestrial fixed wireless, or fixed wireless using hybrid and licensed of hybrid of licensed and unlicensed spectrum. It also requires an email address, and then if scanned images are used, must be good enough quality that optical character recognition is available. If we can go to the next. Quickly, the rebuttal phase is, again, ISPs or providers will have 30 calendar days to submit a rebuttal with evidence. They have many options during the rebuttal phase, including whether or not to actually submit a rebuttal. And then if the location, if the ISP decides not to submit a rebuttal, then the challenge would enter a sustained state. If an ISP concedes, it also enters a sustained state. Otherwise, a dispute would enter a disputed state, and then the WBO will look at all the evidence and make a determination during the next phase. Let's move to the next one. All right, during the final determination phase, the state is really taking a look at all of that evidence and determining whether a challenge is sustained or rejected. Those determinations will be made within 60 days, and then will be posted on the website, as well as submitted to NTIA for final review and approval. Quick last look at the timeline before we move over. So as I noted, NTI has approved initial proposal volume 1. They did that in early 2024. The state anticipates publication of eligible locations for the challenge process in early May, and then the start of the challenge phase around May 20th, and that will run for 30 days. The rebuttal phase will then, after a period of determination for that, then the rebuttal phase will run for 30 days, and then finally the determination phase will run for about 60 days. And that is the overview of the timeline. Again, I think a couple key points that I want to mention, and I think Richmond will highlight these as well. Please understand the registration process for the portal and how that works. There are some limitations about how organizations are structured. Please also consider submitting your challenges early. Do not wait until the end of the challenge window. Through this process, both the portal vendors and states have noticed that many of the challenges might be rejected initially, but if you are submitting early, you could resubmit with the required evidence to move your challenge into the challenge phase. And then please review the evidence necessary to include all of the challenge type evidence to ensure that you have all that information needed for the state to make a decision. And in the simplest terms, if you have, let's say, an availability challenge, make sure that the address or the location that you are challenging is included with the data needed about what is or is not available at that location. One piece without the other is not sufficient. Even if there's only one piece of evidence requested in the evidence chart, make sure that from a common sense perspective that the state can make a real determination about what is being provided at that location. And with that, I'd really like to turn it over to Richmond Hahn, or back to David, sorry.
Yeah, before we get started with Richmond's piece of it, I just wanted to acknowledge that we do have several questions in the Q&A and certainly do appreciate that. A couple of those will be answered as Richmond goes through his presentation, and we will get to the rest of those before the end of the call. So thank you. With that, Richmond, please.
All right, thank you very much. I'm going to go through kind of the registration process and a bit about the portal. There is on Monday, the Wyoming office is hosting a webinar that's an in-depth technical walkthrough. So I highly recommend attending that session. That'll be a great place to get a lot of those bigger questions answered. So I will go ahead and share my screen here. So tomorrow you will be a link will be published and made available to register for the challenge process. So you'll receive this link. When you get it, you'll go ahead and click register now. Once you're in here, we have a drop down of provider names. Please, if there's so say maybe you prefer to be referred to as a certain DBA of the organization that your FRN is registered to. Please just choose the name that corresponds to your FRN, specifically also to your provider ID. That is extremely helpful for connecting any challenges that you may receive to your service. And we can also always change your name in the portal to reflect what your preferred nomenclature. If the provider that you wish to register as, if it's not listed at all, you can go down and click Other, where you will be asked to identify the name that you'd like to use and give your provider ID. Once you're registering here, we'll just go ahead and do an example. Again, at this point, you will be asked to provide your provider ID if you select Other. Enter your EIN, your organization's FRN, the address with which you are registered, the state in which you are registered. So if you're not registered in Wyoming, we do have the option to include wherever you're initially from. Enter a zip code. We have some areas here to upload registration documents. If you have these available, I highly recommend doing it, just to save you the hassle of, if your registration is rejected, having to go back in. So just take the second, upload any documentation you have to identify what provider you are. Then you'll go ahead and click finish there. So at this point, the broadband office will go in, they'll review your submission. If they have any issues, they'll reach out to you. If not, then and they approve you, you will receive a link in your email that will create your account. At that time, you will be able to log in and you will see a portal that looks like this. Letting you know that you'll land on this dashboard here, letting you know the challenge process has not started yet and the challenges cannot be submitted. However, you can review the challenge map. So you can look here, you can sort by BEAD eligibility, building type, community institution, unit count, previous funding programs, get an idea of really what you want. You can use this time to really be prepared for when the challenge window opens. And you can also invite teammates here. One thing that I highly suggest is coordinating with your team. We can't have multiple registrations for the same organization. It gets very messy for the required reporting. So if we find a duplicate org, we will ask you to add your teammates to one of them. And you can avoid that extra step for yourself by just simply determining who in your org is going to sign up, and then you can simply invite your teammates from here to get everyone you need in your org to help you through that process. Now I'm going to hop over here and real quick just do a brief overview of the challenge process itself. So again, from that dashboard, once the challenge window is open, you will be able to add challenges directly from here. You'll also be able to see any challenges you've submitted, any where the SBO has requested revisions, which, to Amy's point earlier, if you submit your challenges early, that gives the office time to um let you know, hey, we're not going to reject this. We think there's something to it, but you've not met the threshold of evidence. It gives you time to return and kind of flesh out what you want to do there, submit the necessary evidence and get that going. So it really does give you a better chance of getting your challenges approved if you submit them early and have that chance. You also see any that have gone through initial review and then any that you have withdrawn. I'm going to click over here to add challenge. You'll be able to see, again, you have the map here for reference. You can pull this out. You can create zones. You can combine zones. You can upload shape files. You can also select individual points. So that gives you a chance to really go through here, dig into the data. You'll select the challenge category that you're looking for. You can go through, you can sort by technology and provider, which will filter down for you to just those points that are relevant. For something like this, you would just need to provide the information. So if this is a planned service, provide the information for the technology type that you're choosing, the speeds that you're projecting. Is it business only, is it residential service, business, or business and residential? At this point, you can select or upload your locations. The max locations, this is just a demo environment, but the Wyoming office I can't remember what that was set to. If anyone remembers, hop in, but otherwise this will be set. You will be notified of that and able to use that to create the challenges to fit the size limits here. You can select or upload an area again. You can upload a list of location IDs. You can also select points on the map to add to your challenge. You'll see all the locations. So if you upload a CSV or something, you'll see all those locations showing up here. And again, I'm going very fast. I know there's not a high level of detail here with our time frame, but I just wanted to again emphasize the webinar on Monday will be a great time to really, we'll walk through all of these challenge types. It'll be a great time to really dive into that. For this planned service challenge, you can, select a file to upload, that kind of to show the necessary, again, you have to meet the threshold of evidence, but, construction permits, whatever the SBO has signified there. Next, then there'll be an attestation. You can submit your challenge. And then we're landing back on the dashboard here. You can see that the challenge that we submitted, you'll be able to view it from your dashboard. And that's really, again, at a high level, an overview of that process. I am going to take a second and hand the mic back over. I'm going to have one of my colleagues join so we can make sure we get all your questions answered. But that is a brief overview of that process.
Thank you very much for that, Richmond. We certainly appreciate that. And as Richmond mentioned, and Amy as well, if you are the person that will be submitting the challenges, doing the rebuttals for your organization, please go in and get registered. And then, as they mentioned, we can only have one registrant per organization. So you will have the opportunity to add folks, but there should only be one primary for each organization. So with that, I think we'll run through the Q&A that is online first. And then if you have a specific question, once we get through these, certainly feel free to type that in the Q&A or raise your hand. The first question was, what CostQuest license does the state have? And it is a Tier C license. What does the state allow bulk uploads of all location IDs, or does the state allow bulk uploads of all location IDs, including CAIs? Richmond, you want to take that?
All right. Great. And I have a colleague help. I saw some of the questions. I have a colleague helping on to field some of these, but do we want to get started with going through the questions here?
Yeah, the question for Ready, Richmond, was, does the state allow bulk uploads of all location IDs, including CAIs?
Yes.
Okay. And is there a file size or a file format limitation?
So there is this, the SBO will set a camera on here, has a limit for amount of locations within a challenge. In terms of file size, we don't have strict limitations. If you run into any issues when you're uploading something, we have our technical email there. We're happy to help facilitate anything you have. So if you have any issues uploading a document, it does happen occasionally, just let us know. We can review what you have. And it's not common, so it's kind of a bespoke problem. We'll work through it together, figure out exactly what the issue is with the file you're trying to upload, or what we can do on our end, and we'll get you taken care of.
And is there a typical file format that you expect, Richmond?
So we leave for the evidence, we leave it a bit open because there's really is a variety of acceptable forms of evidence for some of the different challenge types. For uploading, points and stuff, we definitely obviously CSVs. But in terms of, your evidence, you may have a PDF that's in agreement with you with the local government or the state. You may have that in a doc. So we really leave a bit of flexibility there. And then again, especially if you get your challenge in open early, that gives the SBO a chance to review and say, hey, could you also add this additional documentation? So to conclude, we really keep the evidence, pretty wide in terms of file size. There's not file size and type.
Yeah, very good. What version of the fabric is the state using to make the eligibility determinations? The state is using version 3.2 of the fabric. But just so you're aware, there is also a requirement for the state to look at any changes that were submitted in version 4.0 and consider those at the end of the process as well, prior to the file going over to NTIA. Anything else to add to that, Amy, that I may have missed? Okay,
No,
good.
that'll be relevant, I think, for a later question.
Sure. Does the state require a CAI to have service of 1 gig symmetrical to be considered served? The answer to that is correct. Yes. Is the due date for the rebuttals a rolling 30 days from when the rebuttal is received, or is it a fixed 30 days? It is a rolling 30 days the way that the calendar is built. Anything to add to that, Amy?
No, I think that's correct.
Let's see. James, for those who participated in the challenge process last year for ARPA CPF, where there are particular lessons learned that have been applied to the current challenge process that participating entities should work to take advantage of. Yeah, I would say just the quality of the evidence, James, especially in the rebuttal phase, I think is key. We want to be able to process those as fast as possible, right? To the points that Amy and Richmond both made. The quality of the evidence, equates to the speed of evaluating the challenge and the rebuttal piece of it. So I think that's the key. Focus on those items that are identified as what's required for rebuttal, because that will really be guiding us on the quality and being able to accept or deny a challenge. Anything else about that, Amy?
No, I think the same for the challenge the challenge side as well. I mean, quality of the evidence, making sure it's a complete set of evidence in order to make those determinations about a location, and in order for an ISP to rebut the evidence. So again, it's both sides quality of evidence.
Sure. Maisie, will challenges to the location fabric be accepted if there isn't a location point or a home or business? Can that be flagged for a correction? Maisie, those would have to be sent directly to the state. We do have a challenge being built to submit to the FCC for ones that are identified already. So during this process, if you're going to, or if you identify those, please send them by address, location, lat long information directly to the state. Let's see. Mike, is there a file size limitation? I think Richmond already answered that.
I do want to jump back on that though, real quick. I had Adi, do you want to jump in here?
Yeah. So it's worth noting with the file size limitation, the portal itself will only allow 500 megabytes to be uploaded in one go, with a maximum file size of 100 megabytes per file. If you do have larger evidence than that, we'll have to most probably take it in outside of the system and then upload it in. But generally speaking, that limit's been high enough that nobody has reached it yet.
Yeah, very good. Thank you. Will challenges be accepted that do not affect BEAD eligibility? For example, a challenge to an ISP's 20 meg availability. I guess I really don't understand the question, Jacob. I think it's pretty defined as to what will be accepted. But Amy, is there anything that you could add to that?
No, it seems to me that if that's a challenge that you're looking to make, it might be more appropriate to make that directly with the FCC as part of that challenge process. Perhaps you flag it as part of the state's challenge, but for this process, because NTI is defining broadband as anything that's as served as anything that's above 100 megabits down and 20 megabits up with 100 milliseconds of latency, then anything beyond that is probably not relevant for the challenge process.
Good, thank you, Amy. Again, from Mike, are there file format restrictions? Anything to add to that, Richmond or your team?
There is no particular restriction on file formats.
Okay, good.
But if it's very large, you would recommend compressing it into a zip file.
Great. If the challenge locations are part of a large census block where locations are widely distributed and a provider only claims coverage of a portion of them, will that impact the rebuttal process? That's the first part of the question, Amy.
Yeah, it's not expected that the provider can answer questions about service that's outside their area, right? Like the rebuttal will be tied to the ISP service area. And Adi, do you want to add anything to that about how it works from the platform side?
I don't think there's anything like particular to note. The flow is going to be similar to that of the challenge flow, and it's designed so that if the challenge is specific to you, only you will be able to rebut it. If it's not specific to anybody, then anybody can rebut it.
And then the second part of that question, if 6+ challenges are issued for a location near the provider's network, would they expect the rebuttal to address the distant locations? And
so I think I believe you're referring to an area challenge. So with the area challenge, within each census block group, if 6 or more locations are successfully challenged with the same provider, technology, and reason, then it would trigger an area challenge. So it's worth noting that 6 locations may be near each other, but if they're separated by census block boundary or census block group boundaries, then it wouldn't cross the required threshold. The system will automatically build and process this area challenges for you. So ultimately, just focus on submitting the highest quality challenges for as many locations as possible.
yeah, very good. For the technology selection, would a small cell unlicensed access point that is backhauled via a licensed microwave link consider being served? Well, the recently opened up 6 gigahertz band be considered licensed due to the fact that coordination will be required by the AFC, similar to SAS and CBRS. I cannot answer the second part of that question. Amy, you have any insight into that particular piece?
No, I mean, I think that's something that we could go back and double check on. I have some initial thoughts, but I'd rather come back and perhaps we answer it as part of an FAQ.
Okay, that sounds good. And as far as the first part of that question goes, it is our understanding that it is from that access point to the customer is where you would determine whether it's licensed, unlicensed, but the backhaul piece of it is not considered in that piece in the definition. Again, if Amy, I think that's something we can take back and confirm as well, but as it stands today, that's how it's interpreted.
Okay.
State requirement that a location ID or other data must be notated on the evidence screenshots. Again, Richmond, I'll let you answer that, but it's my understanding that that information is brought over by location when the provider is or challenger is uploading that. Is that correct?
I'm sorry. Yeah, I believe, Adi, do you mind tackling that one?
Yeah, so during the evidence submission, if you're challenging multiple locations, but the evidence is tied to an individual location, so this would be, for example, in latency challenge would most probably tie the evidence to a specific location. You would have to upload a CSV that maps out which location ties to, which evidence file ties to which location. The format is provided, so in the flow, you should be able to see it.
Yeah, very good. Anything else, Eddie, to add to that?
No, I could pull it up on the, or for a quick demo if you'd like.
Could you put it up on the screen? Because if we're talking about like an availability challenge where a screenshot can be used as evidence from the provider's website, you're really talking about an address associated and not a location ID. And I think what David was making sure is that the portal itself ties those together.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm just pulling up a test instance right now. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah. So when going ahead and building a challenge, you can select, for example, a provider service level availability challenge. And in this flow, you're asked to specify, right? So if you were, for example, if you were challenging on the basis that a provider failed to schedule a service installation within 10 business days of request, that would be specific to the address that is being challenged. So once you select a random provider, I think this would be couple. Yeah. So if I were to go ahead and select a group of locations, ultimately for these 15 locations, I would have this evidence mapping and metadata spreadsheet. So when I download this, each and every location ID will be noted. Now, because of the restrictions of the Fabric license, we can't allow you to download the addresses directly, but you can always use this over here to map out the Fabric location ID to the address. Or if you have a Tier D or Tier E license, you can connect those location IDs to the address yourself. Once you have this over here, you just have to note the evidence type that's attached for each of these, the name of the file so that the evidence files can be connected to it, and then a little bit about the evidence file itself so that it can be submitted to the NTIA.
Great. Eddie, thank you for that. And thank you for the demonstration as well.
Of course. Thank you.
James, if there's any challenges related to adding missing CIAs, do entities need to also challenge the underlying Fabric with the FCC, or will those be passed on by the broadband office? Those will be passed on by the broadband office in the challenge file, James. But as far as the identification of the CAIs, that was a state created file for the ready mapping purposes. So yeah, I would pass that on to the broadband office as well. But as part of the whole challenge process, I mean, if you're trying to identify a CAI that's listed as a residential location but identified on the map, those will go in with the file to the FCC. Can you confirm that the CAIs can be submitted in bulk?
So with CAI challenges, we generally recommend submitting one at a time. This is just because it's easier to tie in the specific attributes, and CAIs often have things like name and so on. If you do have a large challenge to make, then we would recommend reaching out to the ready.net team, and we would be able to work with you to get that uploaded.
Yeah, great, Eddie. Thank you. Is map registration open yet? The answer to that is no. You will be receiving those notifications within the next 24 hours. And also a link will be posted on the BEAD section of the WBO website as well for registration, along with a recording of this webinar and a guide for utilizing the portal as well. All of those things will be posted on the WBO BEAD website. Let me just double check. I think we've gone through all of the questions. And I don't see any hands raised, so we just have a minute or two left. Amy, any closing comments from you? And then we'll go to Richmond and Addie.
No, just thank you everyone for your time. We really appreciate it, and stay tuned for more information.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Amy. Richmond?
I just want to take a second to plug the webinar that's on Monday, the technical walkthrough. Highly recommend you attend that. That's going to be extremely informative. Other than that, thank you for your time and patience. And Adi, do you have anything to add?
Yep. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, with that, we'll close the webinar. Thank you again for your participation today, and we look forward for you to participate in the process as well. Have a great afternoon.